Good morning, everyone. CBC News is reporting that former SNC Lavalin executive found guilty on Libya corruption charges. I've been following this story since it broke in February, and it looked like a disaster for Trudeau. But I even thought it would potentially bring down the government early, but I was wrong. It didn't even really register with voters. I mean, he got reelected with a minority. And the reason I talk about this is the Liberals snuck in a DPA deferred prosecution agreement to the 2018 budget, and it kind of blew up in their faces a little bit as SNC blew up. And then the fallout from SNC, while being politically important, really, I mean, it didn't matter all that much to voters, right? The three people, two cabinet ministers and Cesar Chivanez leaving caucus, right? Puglass, Jody Wilson-Raybould, and Philpott leaving first cabinet and then caucus. All of this is a big deal and seemed to indicate an even bigger deal. And all of the scandals, I mean, from the inviting a terrorist to dinner in India, all the way up to SNC Lavalin and all of the in-between ones, from Gropegate to females experiencing things differently. Our feminist prime minister just seemed to be bogged down with all sorts of scandals, but this one really had teeth and meat, and not a whole lot that anybody could do about it except for, absolve the whole company and everything goes away with a DPA. That didn't happen because of Jody Wilson-Raybould. And well, here we are, we're at sentencing. And that's wild, right? That's wild. I didn't think we'd get here. But they have right up until the sentence is passed to institute that DPA. So any day now, maybe, but maybe not. Maybe we go through this week and Babawi gets sentenced and justice is served. Maybe. But what happens to SNC Lavalin? I don't think they answer that question very well in this article. But here is the article. Here we go. A former SNC Lavalin executive was found guilty Sunday of fraud and corruption charges related to the engineering company's close ties with the regime of Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi. After 3 days of deliberation, a Quebec Superior Court jury delivered guilty verdicts on all 5 counts facing Sami Babawi, which included fraud, corruption of foreign officials, and laundering proceeds of crime. Babawi, 73, had served as the head of SNC Lavalin's International Construction Division. He was portrayed by federal crown prosecutors as a key figure in an elaborate scheme to bribe Libyan officials. And I've covered this a lot, so I'm not gonna go over all of the things that he's alleged to have and now he's guilty of doing, right? They said, yeah, he did that. Here's the sentencing part. Sentencing arguments this week. Ben Asia, who was arrested in 2012 and served 2 years in a Swiss jail before pleading guilty to bribing Libyan officials, said his activities in Libya had been approved by Babawi, his superior. The pair agreed to split whatever cash was left in the shell company's accounts after paying off the dictator's son, Ben Asia said in testimony last month. The Crown alleged Babawi pocketed around $26 million as part of the scheme. Babawi's lawyers said that the money was legitimate bonuses that had been authorized by Le Maire. The trial also heard evidence gathered in part by an RCMP sting operation that Babawi offered Ben Asia $10 million while he was in the Swiss jail. This part of the trial kind of made me laugh. Like, if somebody's in jail, they're probably monitoring the phones. Calling them and offering them money to change their story is a bad idea. Unless you think you're untouchable, I guess, but it's a bad idea. It's like what the dumb criminal does in the movie, right? Like, oh, I'm just going to call this guy while the police are listening in. That's exactly what happened. Back to the article. Ben Asia said that the money was offered in exchange for testimony corroborating Babawi's account given to the Swiss authorities. On Sunday, Crown Prosecutor Anne-Marie Manicoen thanked the jurors for listening carefully to the testimony and sifting through the 300 exhibits that were entered into evidence during the 6-week trial. They took their jobs very seriously, Manicoen said. Babawi, who had been out on bail since his arrest in 2014, was released pending his sentencing. Hearings will begin on Thursday. Manicoen wouldn't say how long a sentence the Crown is seeking. Lawyers for Babawi did not speak with reporters following the verdict. What about charges against SNC Lavalin? The interactions between SNC representatives and Saeed Gaddafi are also at the center of federal charges against the company. It is alleged SNC Lavalin paid around $48 million in bribes to Libyan officials between 2001 and 2011, a violation of the Corruption of Foreign Public Officials Act. Federal prosecutors also claim SNC Lavalin defrauded a number of Libyan institutions out of $130 million, yes, over the same period. SNC Lavalin lobbied federal government officials in the hopes of securing a deal known as a deferred prosecution agreement that would have allowed it to avoid a trial on these charges in exchange for paying a fine. Those efforts have so far proved unsuccessful, but resulted in controversy for the federal Liberals. An ethics commissioner report concluded that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau violated ethics laws as he tried to convince then Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould to reverse her decision to not grant the agreement. Wilson-Raybould eventually quit cabinet and the party over the matter. She was re-elected as independent in the last election. Quote, the message generally is that Canada takes seriously its obligation towards all offenses committed, and we will prosecute them as the case comes to be. SNC Lavalin issued a brief statement on Sunday saying it is focused on business and delivering results and will not comment on past or pending court proceedings. Now, it's interesting how the newspaper did this. Usually when they waltz you away from like answering the question they set out to answer, it's a little more obvious or less obvious, but they don't give any answers about what happens with SNC Lavalin. They said, these are the pending charges for SNC Lavalin. This is what's not been dealt with. And then they go on to talk about Justin Trudeau and the political stuff that happened around that. And that's like almost a year old, right? What happens to SNC Lavalin? Are the charges going ahead? Who's running that trial? Is there a trial? When is it? There's lots of questions, right? Lots of questions. No answers. Really interesting. Moving on, City News is reporting Bill Morneau to provide update on federal books as provinces push for more help. Federal Finance Minister Bill Morneau will provide his first update to Canadians on Monday on the state of the economy and the government's books since the October election. The update comes as Morneau prepares to host provincial finance ministers for 2 days of talks this week, in which the amount of federal assistance provided to provinces dealing with economic downturns is expected to figure prominently. Morneau's fall fiscal update will include forecasts on how much the government expects to raise in revenue, how much it expects to spend, and whether the federal deficit will be bigger or smaller than the $19.8 billion the Liberals predicted in their March budget. The update will also reveal how much money Ottawa will transfer to so-called have-not provinces and territories in the coming year, to help them provide the same level of services to Canadians as those provinces that are better off. Alberta, Saskatchewan, and some other provinces have been angry at how such assistance is calculated and are pushing for Ottawa to expand a federal program set up to help provinces that are dealing with sudden economic downturn. And Morneau has committed to discussing the matter. And sometimes they say, oh, we're going to talk about that, and then they quote unquote get busy with other things, and they don't get to that thing. Or, if you're a Conservative member and you go to their convention and they say we're going to vote on supply management and milk, and then it gets too busy and they forget about that. But they do have time to vote on free speech. Hilarious, right? And they voted against it. Here's moving on again. Just because I'm giving you some news that's going on in Canada currently. This I thought was very frightening, and this is Candice Malcolm reporting for the Toronto Sun, and she says Canadian airport employees ID'd as ISIS supporters report. And my brother worked for Pearson International Airport. He used to do fueling for airplanes and stuff, and he would have access to the runways and the direct access to planes and all sorts of stuff. And he was trusted, right? Because you got to trust the guys who are fueling your trucks and fueling your planes and fueling your everything, right? So having people who, this is concerning as somebody who flies out of Canadian airports. So here we go. A troubling new report suggests Montreal Trudeau International Airport has been infiltrated by radicalized individuals. According to an investigative journalism report from the public affairs program JE, aired on the Quebec-based French-language station TVA, several employees at the airport were stripped of their security clearance due to radicalization and support for the Islamic State. The investigation found that one employee with airport security clearance reportedly shared Islamic State propaganda videos, including graphic imagery of torture and murder, through social media accounts. Another individual, according to the report, suggested that the November 2015 Paris massacre carried out by Islamic State agents needed to be replicated. One of the radicalized employees reportedly had direct access to runways and aircraft at Montreal's airport. This employee allegedly had a great deal of knowledge and documentation about military caliber assault weapons. And yet, according to the report, this individual still works at the airport and has simply been moved to a new post, away from runways and aircraft. Oh, whew, wipe your brow, right? Doesn't that make you feel better? Scroll down just a little bit. This raises serious concern about the integrity of Canada's security agencies and our ability to prevent enemy agents from holding key and strategic positions within our country. Part of the problem may be a lack of resources. According to Jean-Pierre Fortin, a spokesman with the Customs and Immigration Union, there is a, quote, crisis at hand when dealing with our borders. The ongoing surge in asylum claims and illegal border crossings along shared Canada-U.S. The land border has left the Canadian Border Services Agency, CBSA, scrambling for resources. Quote, we've had to shift officers from the Trudeau-Montreal airport to the land borders to deal with the surge, Fortin said in a phone interview. While Fortin maintained that officers never compromised national security, even with limited resources, it's easy to see how individuals can slip through the cracks. But significant security red flags, like radicalized Islamic State followers working at a major international airport, should not be ignored. During a recent visit to Canada, U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security John Kelly said North America faces countless threats and terrorist plots against airlines. Given this news out of Montreal and the CBSA's union repeated calls for more frontline officers, the Trudeau government might be forced to take action to address the ongoing security threats we face. This line was the funniest line in the whole article to me. Sure, the Trudeau government might feel some public pressure, but they don't do anything. Like NAFTA got done, new NAFTA, USMCA got done because Trump was literally threatening to blow up our economy. Like he said, fine, I'll do it with just Mexico if you don't stop dragging your feet on this. Make no mistake, they were trying to embarrass Trump and it got turned all around on them and they got left holding the bag, which is what Trump does. But fundamentally, the only way to force Trudeau to do anything is to show him clearly that he will lose control. And if he messed up NAFTA and if Trump followed through, he would have lost control. He would have lost party leadership. People would have lost their minds. It would have been really, really bad. It would have been bigger than SNC, that's for sure. But that didn't happen. They got NAFTA done, blah, 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 blah. Still, the Trudeau government doesn't do anything other than put their fingers in their ears and continue forward with their globalist UN plots. Sorry, UN-backed whatever policies. Garbage. This is something I was talking about yesterday, and this is the last story for today. I focused in and I didn't talk about this. This whole article is just ridiculous. It's poorly thought out. The arguments aren't well thought out. The arguments are basically, you know, and I know that, quote, scientists out there say that there's shortages, so we need to do rationing. And it's garbage. It's BS. There is absolutely no evidence to support what these people are talking about. There's no reason for rationing. But the Globe and Mail feels comfortable publishing this garbage. It's ridiculous. The title is "The Climate Crisis is Like a World War, so let's talk about rationing." Now, what I'm going to focus in on is just this point, because the article betrays itself. In this passage, they say those rich people, they shouldn't be able to spend their money the way they want to spend it because that won't lead to the reductions that we need to see. Here it is. It says, quote, "For allocating stuff, our usual mechanism is price. If you want something and can afford it, generally you can have it. But that's no way to reduce activities that generate emissions, even though sin taxes on meat or carbon taxes on gas may lower some emissions." They don't. That's me. I just want to make sure everybody listening knows that no, a carbon tax doesn't lower emissions. A sin tax on meat won't lower emissions. They don't do anything other than make those things more expensive. And a carbon tax just makes everything more expensive because we're carbon-based life forms. Back to this. They don't restrain wealthy people who like to fly and eat steak and barely notice the expense. So higher prices don't achieve the limitations we need on greenhouse gases. They're also inequitable and unfair. Okay, so they're saying those rich people are terrible. They have all the money and it's unfair they get to spend it in whatever way they want to spend it. How dare they? We can't get reductions in emissions that way. But further down in the article, it says, how would rationing work? Here it is, quote, "There are numerous possible methods. Carbon could be a kind of currency we spend along with regular money when purchasing high emission goods or services. Each of us could receive an allocation of carbon points to spend in a month or a year. These could be stored on a smart bank card when paying for gasoline or airline tickets or certain foods or more broadly energy use. The card would electronically deduct money plus appropriate number of carbon points. If we used our entire allocation, we might be able to purchase more. There are pros and cons to tradability from individuals who don't need them, rewarding them financially for their low carbon lives. Prices of goods such as meat would not necessarily rise. Rather, everyone would only be allowed to purchase certain amounts." So on one side, if you use your wealth, the wealth that you've worked for and accumulated to purchase, these high emission things without paying the carbon tax, you are beyond reproach. But if you use your wealth to buy carbon credits from our little system here, you will be loved and adored by all the woke left Twitter blue checkmark people. What trash. Like, the mental gymnastics to get here, and the whole article is like this. The whole article just has these ridiculous... Part of this is talking about how accepted and aware people are of global warming. 42% now believe it's an emergency. This is the science, the quote science they're trying to use to push this rationing thing. It's an emergency. See, 42% of people believe it. Except that the polls they use to get to this number are shaped. And the people answering the polls are shaped, right? If you don't answer the correct couple of questions, you get removed from the poll, which we saw clearly in polling in Canada for our last election. So they can pretty much get surveys to say whatever they want. And then when the survey they got to say whatever they want backs up their ridiculous rationing plan, they'll say, see, 42% of people think it's an emergency, everybody, forgetting that rationing is based on scarcity, not an emergency, a coming emergency, maybe 20, 30 years down the road. The emergency will be the bad policies that people are trying to shove down our throats for this woke, green, postmodern, post-sanity world we've created. Honk, honk. Welcome to the clown world. And if you don't buy in, well, you're the first person here, the wealthy person who refuses to pay sin taxes, and we can't restrain wealthy people like you. You're awful. We'll get you. The division is just palpable. It's what they're trying for. This gaslighting is ridiculous. The whole thing is crazy. We've just gone around the corner, right? And people who talk sanity just get shouted down. People who say, this is nuts, get people saying, what about the children? Yeah. What about the children? They didn't fare too well in Stalin's USSR or Hitler's Germany if they were Jews. Right? What about the children? Indeed. So. That's the end. I just think it's crazy. This is 2019, almost 2020, and Canada is not willing to talk about the reality of the world that we currently live in. Having a carbon tax on emissions of 1.6% of the world while ignoring China, ignoring India, ignoring the United States. We're leading the way, everybody! I mean, if the world population was 100 people in a room and Canada was leading, nobody would be listening to us. Nobody. Because we don't have enough, we're not representative enough, right? Not enough people. It's so frustrating. Anyway, with that, thanks for watching. Check out CanadaPoly.com and have a wonderful, wonderful